Hello, my name is Callum Giles, and I'm a second year media student, and this is my final major project called Chromatica. So this project is a fashion editorial magazine focused around youth fashion, identity, and self-expression. It's collaborative and it's something I photographed, edited, and designed all by myself while working alongside a range of different creatives, including designers, models, stylists, makeup artists, and friends who all contributed towards the final outcome. The overall purpose and context of the project relates to the evolving contemporary media scene, especially within youth culture and fashion. My project specifically focuses on youth fashion and expressionism, but originally actually had multiple ideas for different magazines with completely different themes to this one. One was focused around candid street photography and sort of freezing real life moments naturally and saying, what a regular person can see that's underlooked. And then the other was based around, the youth music scene and bands and, what music will become in the future and I guess in London in general. And I guess I eventually chose fashion editorial because it felt like it gave me the strongest visual opportunity, while also allowing me to collaborate with people I already knew within fashion and design spaces. I already had fashion-focused friends and creatives around me who, wanted to participate when I've mentioned it being an idea before. So I guess naturally the project developed into something much more collaborative and community-based, which I really liked. And I guess sort of originally this project was expected to be moving image production because a lot of my previous FMPs and projects have involved filmmaking and cinematic storytelling. But I wanted to move in a completely different direction this time so I could expand my skill set and create more variety within my portfolio for future aspirations. And once I decided to focus on print media and editorial design, I narrowed my ideas down to 3 concepts before eventually finalizing Chromatica. In terms of style, I describe the project as a hybrid between indie editorial photography and traditional high fashion photography, because technically the lighting and studio setups are inspired by fashion editorials and professional studio photography, but the poses, garments, and overall sort of atmosphere feel much more natural and expressive rather than overly commercial or staged. I didn't want the magazine to feel too artificial or perfect because I thought it would remove personality from the people involved. Instead, I wanted it to feel authentic, collaborative, and, expressive and reflective of real creative individuals. So this is the front cover of the magazine, and I guess I immediately wanted Chromatica to establish a strong visual identity. And I guess I should mention that Chromatica wasn't the original name I came up with. It was between 2 names, being that of Prisma and Chromatica. And I asked around, I got, secondary opinions, and I guess me and everyone else sort of decided that this just sort of has a catch to it. We preferred Chromatica, and that's what I ended up going with. The image you can see is mainly monochromatic, so black and white, but then I contrasted that with the bold red typography surrounding the model, which instantly introduces the color spectrum idea without making the cover feel too overwhelming. And I think the contrast between black and white imagery and color typography creates a really strong balance between simplicity and intensity, which reflects the overall tone of the project really, really, really well. And the typography surrounding the model also introduces different sections within the magazine, as you can see here, which helps the cover feel much more inspired by authentic editorial fashion publications rather than simply acting as a photography portfolio cover. I experimented with multiple layouts and font choices before finalizing the design because I wanted the typography to feel clean and modern while still being, experimental. I wanted to add my own catch to it and make it, different and personal to me as a project. I also think beginning the project with monochrome imagery was important because I guess it allows the later, color sections and the experimentalism of, color and my theme of my overall magazine to feel a lot more impactful and intentional, once you progress through it. Moving into the contents page. The monochromatic visual style still continues, with color mainly appearing through typography rather than photography itself. And because the lighting in this room is very bad, I don't know if you can see this, but there's coloured font, non-coloured font, and then the background is a black and white inverted image. It also features the word contents right here, as it's the contents page, but after printing it didn't turn out as well, and it didn't print out fully, so that's a shame. I guess I should use as reference for future projects if I want to make print media again, but it's okay. But I deliberately did this decision because I wanted the colour to feel meaningful throughout the project, as I said before, and not really be random decoration. I wanted it to feel impactful. I wanted it to be on purpose, and I wanted you to feel like you're easing into the theme of the magazine. I want it to grasp you slowly. I don't want it to just grab you and pull you in. I want you to be surprised, and I just want it to be more impactful, honestly. And you can see the strong use of Latin terminology, which you can also see on the front cover, with the word choices and the language. So I guess instead of simply naming colours normally, I use names such as Coccneus, Aureus, Luteus, Viridis, Ceruleus, and Violaceus. And so that's just every colour in the rainbow. So that's red, orange, yellow, green, blue and purple, or violet and scarlet if you want to be specific. And I chose the Latin because I thought it sounded much more refined, artistic and luxurious, and it helps separate the project from feeling too mainstream or generic. It almost makes each section feel more curated and exhibition-like rather than simply functioning as another chapter within a magazine. And another detail I'm very proud of is the inclusion of terahertz ranges associated with each colour, which we'll see later on, as you can see right here, but we'll get to that in a minute. It's obviously a small detail, and realistically not everyone will immediately notice it when you open the magazine, but I think it reinforces the chromatic and spectrum-based identity of the project in a much deeper conceptual way. This contents page also introduces the structure for the rest of the magazine. Every section follows an introductory number page, an article page discussing the theme and ideas behind the section, and then a photographic double spread. And I kept this exact same structure consistent because consistency creates rhythm, and it's cohesive, and I like having cohesion throughout my projects. I think it's really important, and it works with how I like to style things. But I guess at the same time, I changed the image collages and compositions in every section, so it's not too repetitive. Moving on to the first section of the magazine. This section is called Coccneus. So, as I said before, this means deep scarlet or red in Latin. And as you can see, the first thing you can see is massive typography. This was something that I guess I researched and saw in other editorial type designs, and I just thought it was so intriguing. I feel like it just sucks you into the visuality of it. I think it's so illuminating and it stands out so much, and I guess it aligns with being both simplistic while also reinforcing the structure that I'll continue throughout the magazine. But as I said before, we've got the terahertz number, so if you don't know what this means, this was just a random thing I decided to include. It's basically the range in terahertz within the electromagnetic spectrum on visible light. So the range in which you can see red light with your eyes is between 400 and 480 terahertz, which has nothing to do with the magazine whatsoever. I just thought, having factual science-based things, involved as well was really, really cool and interesting. On the article page here on the right, I begin introducing more conceptual ideas surrounding identity and expressionism. One major creative choice, throughout the entire project was the inclusion of rhythmic and poetry-inspired quotes, as you can see in the color typography here. This one reads, "A fever trapped inside a glass bead. It is the exact moment a secret becomes a stain on a silk collar." So it's more of a metaphor than anything, but I thought that, having a mixture of both factual things and fictional things, while also having, your fully cohesive and creative design together in one big piece, I just thought was very contrasting and very, sort of on the theme of the magazine, and I really like what it adds. And these quotes don't explain the imagery, but they create atmosphere and emotional identity, and that's really what I was going for. And rather than colors simply just existing, they begin to feel like they have each a symbolic role and I guess sort of personality throughout the magazine. And I think this was really important, because without these details, the project could have really easily just been a collection of fashion photographs, without any sort of deeper meaning or conceptual cohesion. So I thought, adding little details like that really stand out and do what I want, and did what I want for the magazine to sort of stand out and be my own creation. If we turn over again, we have our first double spread. As you can see, we've got the model right here. This was someone that I knew personally and I have for quite a long time. And this was his first time doing a modeling gig. And I think he pulled it off really well. I think the outfit really suits him. I think the colors, contrast his face and eyes really well. I think that overall it just looks really great. And I wanted it to look pretty simplistic, but I wanted the idea of, the overall theme and how I want things to sort of look visually to follow in the magazine later on. But this is obviously pretty simplistic as, an opening section. And as you can see, the lighting, it's quite intentionally flat and it's front facing. And that's what I was talking about earlier with the high fashion inspiration when it came to the photography, where the lighting is used to minimize harsh shadows, which, as you can see here, he doesn't have any shadows on him. And to obviously keep focus on the garments, styling, poses, and, facial and body expressions. And the setup I used was a two-way front-facing light rig. So a fill light and a key light, just combined with a plain white backdrop, because I wanted it to feel clean. I know I wanted the pages to be white and not, a special looking color, because I've not always been the most skilled when it comes to color, and especially designing, digital elements like this. I've never done it before. So I wanted it to stay pretty simplistic when it came to making a magazine and it came to the color choices, but obviously there is color involved, and I did have my little quirks and little details that I've added. I guess the angles and compositions, it depended very heavily on the garments that they were wearing. And, I still exaggerated certain features and perspectives, where I could. But overall, I wanted the photography to feel natural and in the moment, rather than, over-planned and, yeah. And because this project is physical and still image-based rather than film, there obviously isn't traditional sound design or music involved. So visual pacing and rhythm became much more important throughout the layouts, which is something I had to research and learn. And obviously it didn't turn out perfect, but still proud nonetheless. Moving into Aureus, the next section. The visual structure, as you can see, remains consistent, but the emotional tone becomes warmer and more focused on themes like construction, process, and identity, as it also says on the front cover. And, the color orange, I feel, naturally feels more transitional within the spectrum. So this section acts as sort of like a bridge between the intensity of red or cochineuse and the more expressive themes, as we're going to see later in this project. And as you can see, I flipped the typography number intro page with the article page for cohesion, obviously to make it slightly different each section. I do switch these around and I switch the image placements around, but we'll see that in more detail later on. But the article page within Aureus focuses more on creation and process, especially regarding handmade fashion and collaborative styling, as it says in the text. Some of the garments used throughout the shoot were fully handmade before production by the designers, and some were just scraps that they put together on set, which was honestly really, really intriguing to see. But layering and experimentation was definitely a big major part of the production and the shoot when that took place. And I guess that spontaneous process contributed heavily towards the authentic editorial feel that I really, really wanted throughout the project. And if we move on to the double spread, this section includes one of my favorite accidental outcomes of the entire production process. And that's the best way I can describe it. I don't like to call it an accident because it was half an accident and it was half planned, but I decided to keep it in here anyway. But during the shoot, there was a secondary backup camera in case anything happened to the main one that I borrowed. And the one that I brought wouldn't connect to the lighting rig, and only the secondary one would. So obviously we were trying to fix it, we were trying to troubleshoot. And I took a couple photos using that camera as well, which never actually ended up being in the magazine. But this photo specifically, one of my models called Felix, she was also my chief lighting assistant, as well as a backup model because someone didn't turn up, unfortunately. You can see half of his face is heavily lit by light, which is quite interesting and something I've never really seen before, while the rest sort of fades into shadow and remains quite normal. This wasn't really intentional, but I didn't really want to remove the image. I wanted to add it anyway. And basically, to simplify it, this was a malfunction with the secondary camera linking to the light source, triggering the light source right as I was taking a photo. So half of the light had already traveled into the sensor of the camera as the photo was taken. So it was completely in half, which I thought was really, really cool. And I think moments like this sort of help prevent the magazine from feeling too artificial or overproduced. Moving on to the next section, luteus, or yellow. As you can see on the intro page, the terahertz range changes depending on the color. So it's gonna consistently go up, and I think the range from red to purple is between 400 and 900 terahertz, and then anything outside of that is visible light that we can't see. But as you can see, the visual tone becomes much brighter and a lot more expressive, reflecting themes of visibility, individuality, and attention. And I guess at this stage, the progression through the spectrum begins feeling a lot more noticeable visually, especially as some people didn't understand the theme going into it, but sort of became more understanding as you went through, because you would see there's obviously a repeating theme throughout the magazine. That rhymed. This article page, I guess, sort of focuses on the idea of visibility and how fashion can allow people to present different sides of their identity publicly and sort of not really feeling ashamed, and I guess cohering with the theme of expressionism. And I wanted each article page to support the imagery conceptually without becoming too explanatory or overwhelming. And as you've seen in the previous pages, all of the secondary pages all have photographs on them, as well as the double spreads, but they're kept a lot more smaller, a lot more simplistic, a lot more toned down before you obviously move on to the double spread of photographs, which we will do right now. And as you can see, the photograph spreads on this section become a little bit more expressive in terms of posing and composition, I think, and definitely with the layout, as you can see, with this sort of offset picture of the model over here, sort of over the middle mark, which I did deliberately. I thought that, changing things up and sort of being experimental with how it looks really fit the theme, and I think that this photo specifically in this model, it just turned out so beautifully. and the viewer already understands the visual structure by this point in the magazine, which obviously allowed me to feel comfortable experimenting slightly more with layouts and the image positioning, while still, as I said before, maintaining cohesion throughout the rest of the project. Moving into Viridis, the thematic focus shifts towards more sustainability, material and construction. This section links heavily to the upcycled and handmade aspects of youth fashion culture. And as you can see, the theme and the colours that I chose match almost completely to what the people are wearing. As you can see, I use a brown background here to complement her skin. And obviously the colour palette here obviously matches the outfit completely, which I did the same here. And I actually used a colour matching software, which you can find on my project proposal. I've linked it, I've hard referenced it. And you can basically find a focus point on an image and it will tell you the exact hex code. And I messed with that until I had two colours that sort of, worked cooperatively and, made my magazine look very, very clean and nice and still followed the theme that we've been doing this whole time. And the article page, which is on the left, same as the orange section previously, it discusses, I guess, sustainable fashion, repurposed garments, and individuality, and how it can be expressed through handmade or reconstructed clothing. And I thought this was very important to include because alternative fashion, and its culture often overlaps heavily with sustainability and personal creation. And obviously this being a main theme with both the designers that I managed to collaborate with as well. I think it just worked really well. And it's also a very dominant thing and important thing in the world right now, because obviously climate change is still ongoing and getting worse. So I feel like, instead of just making a magazine about fashion and then just talking about a bunch of random things, I feel like talking about important political subjects subtly, while also, it working with the rest of the magazine sort of theme was really, really important and something that I really cherish about all the design elements. Moving on to the double spread of photography. I really, really like this outfit. As you can see, she's sort of wearing like a camo fleece top with sort of like straps. It's sort of like sewed together and it looks kind of ripped, sort of similar to the first section. He sort of has, like ripped sleeves, which I think were really, really cool. All of these were handmade or, obviously constructed together on the spot or prior. And I just think it was so, seeing everyone in their outfits, on the spot, going one by one and taking photos of them and seeing them smile and just light up and enjoy it, visually was so meaningful to me, because it was like, it wasn't just that I've gone out of my comfort zone and I've been more expressive and made, this project with all these really, really amazing people, but it's that they enjoyed it, and a large majority had never done anything like this before, but no one was upset, no one was, insecure or uncomfortable. Everyone would just get up there and do it, and it was amazing. But yeah, I guess the focus when it came to these photos was texture, layering, and I guess more details. That's why we have more close-ups, more variety of images and such. And I guess this sort of changes the viewer's relationship with the imagery slightly, because unlike before, the focus, I guess, becomes less about the model alone and more about the clothing and the craftsmanship, which obviously I wanted to include the processes of the people involved, and I wanted to, allow them to have a place to review, their designs and artwork and all of their creative, aspirations. And I think this section really highlights that a lot more than the others that we're going to see later on. Moving into Ceruleus. The atmosphere in this section, I guess, becomes more calm and sort of introspective, quite, visually. The layouts begin using more negative space, and I feel like it creates a softer and less intense feeling compared to, the earlier sections. And another thing I've got to mention prior is that, as well as, having these sort of metaphorical handmade quotes that I included in all the sections, I also have real quotes by real, artistic, people and creatives and famous people who are involved in any sort of, creative sector. Like, for example, this section here, how wonderful yellow is, it stands for the sun, by Vincent van Gogh, obviously a famous painter from 100-ish years ago, French painter. This one's Frank Sinatra, so obviously a musician, so it obviously follows the creatives and collaborative sort of theme that I've continued to demonstrate up to this point. The terahertz is obviously continuing to rise. We're now between 6 and 670 terahertz, which is the blue range on which we can see blue light. And I guess sort of moving on to this article page on the right here, it's focused a lot more on internal identity and self-reflection. I guess as you can rather see, it's got sort of a darker tone, but not really in the sad sense, more in sort of the mysterious and I guess sort of visually presentable way. And the progression throughout the color spectrum becomes more emotional and conceptual rather than being purely visual the entire time. I guess moving on to the double spread, this was my favorite to design. I just thought it was so cohesive, it works so well together, and I just think it looks the most industry ready and most professional in my honest opinion. And there was a handful of models that helped with this piece and collaborated and got up on the the stage, got up on the in front of the backdrop and got changed into their outfits and whatnot. And I think there were 9 or 10 models in total, and a couple people, maybe 3 or 4 of them, wore multiple outfits that aren't featured in this magazine. I just chose the ones that followed the theme, of course, because by the end of this I was already at 24 pages. But yeah, I don't know, it feels more restrained compositionally, and I just feel like it works so well together. You can see everything in more detail, but there's not too much repetition in, I guess, the dynamics of the shot. She's sort of leaning on her hand here, and then it's sort of a close-up of her jewelry, tattoos, and it's her armband. And then we have a photo of her, this bottom one over here, which was a beautiful photo. I loved it so much. And it was, I guess the best way for me to describe it was what she was wearing in this blue outfit. It sort of had this spine sort of texture, sort of fluffily, sort of like one of those like shower scrub things. It was sort of like that, but it was a spine down the back of her outfit. And she laid in this dynamic sort of swimming pose where her arms were out and her legs were sort of folded like a frog, and she was just laying down. And I don't know, it outlined her tattoos and the overall vibe of everything she was wearing. And the black and the blue and the silver just worked so well. It was so complimentary. It was definitely what I was most proud of. But I love every section of this magazine, and I put hours upon hours of time into it. And as you can see, the lighting setup hasn't really changed through any of the photos. But I feel like the posing and framing are a lot more emotional, a lot more personal, and that was a massive focus of this section. And I feel like it works very well with both the colour and the model, and is quite individual compared to the rest of the other sections. Moving on to Violaceus. So this is purple and the final section of my magazine. This section was a lot more experimental, as I guess you can see by the images. You know, she's not really looking at the camera, you can't really see what she fully looks like. And I feel like sort of with layering, this was a lot more thrift related, I feel like, this outfit, because instead of it being handmade, it was sort of multiple things layered together. And this model was actually one of the designers for the majority, probably at least half of the outfits we saw previously. And we were running short on models, and she had purple hair, and she had, you know, this massive suitcase full of clothes, same with the other designer. And thankfully she modeled for me, and I feel like it turned out so well, and I'm so glad that, you know, my theme of going from red to purple and, you know, going through a visible light spectrum and it relating to identity, having that as a backup, but also having a creative, because everyone featured in this magazine is a creative. I believe that this model over here, she does art. I think she does something related to fashion as well. I'm not quite sure what she does, sort of vocationally. He makes music. So everything is connected and everyone is a creative, and I feel like all of the themes are interconnected, and everything that I did deliberately, and also, you know, sort of reinforces all of that even more, which is great. But, you know, as we know, purple naturally feels more surreal and imaginative, and I guess sort of rich and luxurious as well, because it's sort of the colour of royals and such. It's just a very, I guess, professional and profound, you know, it's a special colour, you know, it's not like an everyday use, it's got to be applied properly and in certain, you know, ways. But I don't know, I think it works very well with the conclusion and progression throughout the magazine. And I think everything she's wearing was very cohesive and worked wonderfully together. Yeah. Moving on to the final double spread of the magazine, I obviously try to infer all of that in the imagery as well. As you can see, she's sort of dazing into the distance and looking up. She's not making eye contact with the camera, which she is on this side. And I feel like that's more experimental compared to the others. Everyone was more serious, and I feel like this one was sort of just like so in the moment, and it was unintentionally as well, obviously, because she wasn't planning on being a model originally. It just turned out to be that way. But I feel like the photos in her section and it sort of being a last moment thing, and then the theme I built around it as well, all just worked so hand in hand. And she did a wonderful job, and I'm very proud of everyone who took part. It was amazing. Yeah. We're right at the end of the magazine. This is the 6th section by this point. And I guess we fully moved away from just simple fashion presentation, and obviously more towards identity and artistic expression. And I'm glad that she got to do this and got to present her own garments off as her, while being featured in the magazine. So thank you very much for taking part, Jamie, and Jess as well, for both contributing garments and helping me organise this whole thing, and meeting new people and being such great sports, honestly, throughout the entire thing, production, pre-production, research, planning, ever since I first started talking to all of these people. And yeah, I don't know, it's very unconventional, this section, as I guess I sort of said before. And yeah, I just wanted it to feel a lot more freeing and expressive. But obviously I wanted the editorial identity to still be established from start to finish. But those are all the sections. So I guess I want to talk a little bit about collaboration and my processes during the magazine before I talk about the back cover and the end of the magazine. But you know, throughout the production process, this was as soon as I started originally making my ideas. This was when I was trying to find models, and this was even after I booked the shoot. Throughout the entire production, collaboration was one of the strongest, you know, aspects in the magazine, which I'm honestly baffled even happened in the first place, because it was definitely not something I was comfortable doing, but I did it anyway, and I think that I still made something that I'm very proud of. We also had a backup makeup artist throughout the shoot, and she was, you know, mainly making small adjustments to people who maybe didn't come in makeup, and obviously I was supervising all of these people. And she was also a model at a certain point, but she didn't have a featured section. But I had all of these different people with different roles, and it was working so well. And you know, even some of the people that I had never met before, or my friends that I brought along had never met before, you know, got into contact with these people. And even since the Jamie, the last model here, she has her final major project coming up, and she's got into contact with some of the models that we've seen in this magazine for one of her, you know, garment pieces that she's currently working on. So, you know, it doesn't just impact me, and it's not just like it wasn't just one of those things where I just got models and then, you know, that's it, and I made a project. These are, you know, people that want to continue doing creative things like this, and then obviously other people get to take advantage of that and you know, do something creative on their side as well, which I think is so beautiful. But yeah, I guess overall everyone got along extremely well. It was very comfortable and a very collaborative environment throughout the entire production. But I would say the first hour or so of the shoot was mostly set up and planning. And I wish I sort of organised more beforehand, of like when I was first getting in and setting everything up. Maybe done a bit more research on the lighting rigs and such that I had booked for the day, and I guess sort of troubleshooting if anything went wrong, just sort of overthinking everything in a positive and, you know, intelligent way, obviously, so that it was streamlined and obviously I could produce everything I wanted and get everything I wanted out of the shoot, I guess, as a whole. And yeah, I don't know, but at the same time, the spontaneous nature of the shoot, I feel like also contributed heavily towards the natural editorial atmosphere that I really wanted to begin with anyway. I then went on to do my exhibition, and I guess to end things off with the magazine, at the very end of the shoot, as you can see on the image right here, I asked everyone to get involved, and to get together for one final group, you know, photograph, whether they officially made it into the magazine or not. As I guess I mentioned prior with the makeup artist, which is this model right here. So the first 6 are obviously in colour order, and then it went pink, and then a sort of light, sort of yellowy white. But that didn't really fit the theme, so they never ended up making it. But obviously, I still took photos of them. I gave them their photos, and they were free to do what they want with them. And I guess this image eventually became the back cover. And honestly, it's probably my favourite from the entire project, because it perfectly represents the thing I've been talking about this whole time, you know, the themes of unity, identity, pride, collaboration, and expressionism. And the whole magazine has been built around that since we opened it. And I guess, as I mentioned prior, there were 9 models involved altogether, all with completely different styles, backgrounds, personalities, experiences, and seeing everyone so comfortable and so connected by the end of the shoot was genuinely one of the best parts of the entire experience, and something I'm never going to forget. And I guess talking about feedback, as I received a decent amount of feedback, both through my peers and through my exhibition where I got to present my work in front of my school. I collected 23 responses through a Google form I made. And obviously I received, alternative feedback through mouth to mouth, or through messages or whatnot. But throughout the magazine, I guess I wanted to create questions that would sort of fill in all of the gaps of knowledge and what people preferred completely into this Google form. So I had a plethora of questions, one of which was, I think, the final question, and it was just a rating of 1 to 10 of how much you liked it. And I got 23 responses for every question. So 23 people did my form, and my average score for the magazine and what people thought I did with this project was a 9.22 out of 10. And I guess my most positive aspects that people said they enjoyed and thought were professional and industry ready were my photography, my color palette, and my overall creativity and originality for the magazine, which I think makes sense because I think the main focus is the photography, obviously with underlying elements and themes as well. But sort of the theme of the color spectrum and it being black and white on the outside, and then sort of looking into this colored thing was something I've never seen before. I just thought was very interesting, especially as I like science a lot when I was growing up, and I just think color is such an important thing in life, in creative subjects, and I guess everything. So we're blessed to be able to see color. And over half of the responses also described this project as, already feeling highly polished and industry ready, which, really encouraged me to I guess for future projects and future aspirations to work even harder and to keep striving. But it's also, I guess, a sort of a pat on the back for doing well and making good out of something that I would never thought I would experiment with ever. But I did receive some criticism, which I wanted, obviously, as feedback. And the main thing that people were saying was that the layouts could have been more varied. I guess to boost engagement across the pages. But half of the responses on the question that referred to that answered none anyway. So some people didn't want any changes, but the other half could have said, going from section to section, they could have looked a bit different. And obviously I did try to employ this, as you can see, like the sections don't look exactly the same. I do switch where things go and how the text looks, and how it's sort of arranged on the side, or it's split across, or it's, I did change it, but people obviously gave their own opinion, and that's what they thought, and I can see it, and I'm glad that I made mistakes, because I want to learn from my mistakes. But I think overall the project proved my ability to adapt creatively, and work outside my comfort zone, which is exactly what I wanted to improve, and something that I still want to keep expanding and working with people I don't know and doing things that I'm not used to, because I want to become a better creative, and I want to become more confident in myself and my abilities to work. But moving away from filmmaking and I guess going into print media like this was very intimidating at first, especially because I had to learn new workflows involving, photography, studio lighting, editorial layout design, typography, and, learning how to use more of Adobe's Creative Cloud softwares, like InDesign and Photoshop, things that I've dabbled into before, but not to the level of creating an entire magazine. So obviously there was a lot to focus on and research going into it, but it still worked out in the end. But yeah, I'm genuinely really proud of my final outcome, especially because of how collaborative and ambitious the project became. and how many people enjoyed it and wanted copies, and how highly they thought of me and my work, which was really, really shocking. But yeah, it makes me so happy. But I'd also like to mention, as you can see here, all the collaborators involved in the project. Yeah, I couldn't have done it without you. I couldn't have achieved this, especially the designers, make artists, and my lighting technician. All the garments that were provided, everything. I would not have been able to do this and execute this without your intervening and your efforts to help and your offering to collaborate with me. And this project was mainly a one-off opportunity for me, I guess, to fully explore physical media and editorial design in depth, especially because the studio lighting setups and Adobe Creative Cloud and such were very new things to me. But obviously I had to use them professionally. But yeah, although I still want to continue making films and continue writing although I still want to continue making films and writing moving image stories in the future, this project did really help expand my creative skill set and taught me a lot about photography, design, collaboration, and adapting to completely different media formats. So thank you everyone for watching and listening. Goodbye.